Hi, in this video I'm going to talk about two characters of the visual novel The House in Fata Morgana. If you haven't seen my review of that awesome visual novel, I'm going to put the link in the description below so you can check it out, it's spoiler free. I'm also going to put a link to my other video where I talked about Mel and Nelly. That video does contain spoilers, just like this one. This one will contain spoilers, information related to the background of Yukimasa and Pauline, the characters that I'm going to be exploring in this sort of video analysis. So keep that in mind. So this video where I talk about Yukimasa and Pauline is for those of you that have already completed the story of the house in Fata Morgana, or if you are not interested in playing that visual novel and you just want like information, perhaps because you find the analysis of these complex characters somewhat interesting or applicable to any sort of thing, like for example if you play tabletop role-playing games. Because for those of you that are new to my channel, I mainly talk about tabletop role-playing games. So if you wanted to create a villain, if you are a game master and you want to present a challenging villain in your next adventure or campaign, Yukimasa is a really good example for that, and Pauline could actually assist him in certain ways. That is, you do not need to play those characters as they are, but they could serve as inspiration. But also, if you are a player and you wanted to create an interesting player character, perhaps you could modify some things to create an anti-hero or anti-heroine in the case of Pauline. Or you want to play a sort of villainous characters, because some players are quite skilled in playing, let's say, neutral evil or lawful evil characters, even chaotic evil characters sometimes, for certain campaigns, and they still manage to move things along without screwing up the entire thing, because it's very challenging to play one of those characters in a campaign. Then this video could serve as information to do that, or maybe you are just interested in seeing some characters that could mimic some aspects of real life. That's part of what makes the House in Fata Morgana such an amazing visual novel, because there are so much things that could resonate with different people. Well, let's get started. First, I'm going to give you a short summary, not getting too much into details, but just a basic overview of the story of Yukimasa and Pauline. And later on, I'm going to share my thoughts on them. And just a warning that this video is going to get quite philosophical. That is, I'm going to express my personal views. I'm not going to say that these are the way that my particular views are the way express the ways that the world works, or that contain some sort of deeper meaning to life itself. That is up to you to determine that. So let's get started. When we are first introduced to Yukimasa and Pauline in the visual novel, you see them presented in a period, in a time that it looks like perhaps late Renaissance or mid-Renaissance. That's how I see it. They do not give you too much information. You just see this European setting. It seems to be someplace in Italy. Perhaps Venice. I don't remember if they specify the place. And there are some parts of the story that also take place in Spain. But you can see that there is a lot of trade between the West and the East. So first we are introduced to this character, Pauline. She's a young woman, perhaps a teenager. She's quite high-spirited. They also do not give you the exact age. She seems to be around perhaps 17, 18, 19, who knows. But she lives with her mother alone in this place that it looks a lot like Venice in my opinion. And she lives a carefree life. She is just happy and enjoying all the simple pleasures. And her father is constantly traveling. He's a sort of businessman that is moving across the sea. It seems that he's constantly visiting Japan. and he's bringing stuff from different places, commerce between Europe and Japan. Mm. And then the father arrives once more, returns home, but this time he brings along who seems to be his most trusted crew member. He's probably his second in command. He's Yukimasa. Now, Yukimasa is obviously of Japanese blood, but he was born in Europe. Although he does not share this information with Pauline, and the father of Pauline is also of Asian origin. He's probably Japanese as well, and he married Pauline's mother. She seems to be Italian. You never see her picture, but you can tell a bit from the way she talks and where they are living at. So they start talking. I'm still quite confused about the exact location where the story takes place. It's either in Italy or perhaps even in Spain. Mm. So they start to talk, and Pauline becomes infatuated with Yukimasa. She develops a crush on him, and you can see that Yukimasa is not finds that attention quite pleasant or agreeable. He's a very pleasant man. It's also difficult to determine his age, probably 20 something. Mm. And because Pauline and Yukimasa, because they share that Asian blood, they get along quite well. And from the very start, you start to, in my opinion at least, I started to see that something was not exactly right with Yukimasa. He was just so pleasant without sharing too much about him, too much information. This is very interesting, and I will talk more about that in a few moments. So you see that the interaction between Pauline and Yukimasa, it's basically Pauline fawning over Yukimasa, giving him showering him with attention, and he's just like being very pleasant, apparently kind. He has this sort of tranquil smile to him. But eventually, the father and Yukimasa need to travel once again. It's their business. They need to go to Japan, apparently, carry out some commerce. And so they set off, and there is sort of emotional separation between Yukimasa and Pauline, at least not as potent as you would expect from people who have just met, but you can see that there is some sort of link or bond between them, and they want to see each other again. In the story, this is not presented in chronological order that is in the visual novel, but I prefer to start with the beginning of things in this part of the story, at least in this particular period, because in the house in Fata Morgana there is reincarnation, but in this particular section of the story, I prefer to present it from the very origin of that part. So Yukimasa and Pauline's father travel once more to. I don't know if it's their first time there because they have been traveling east, but it seems that they want to go to Japan, and there is a sort of problem with customs. They do not allow them to set foot on land. Mm, I think it's the first time that they go there because Pauline's father tells Yukimasa that he's sad that he could not set his foot on his homeland. So it's probably the first time they went there, but the authorities will not let them in because there is a suspicion that there is some sort of smuggling being carried out on the ship of of Pauline's father. They carried out investigations, and they discovered that there is a smuggler, and there is a suspect, an individual that he's supposed to be the smuggler. So Yukimasa and Pauline's father, Asama is his name if I'm not mistaken, are trying to figure out what to do with the situation. So Yukimasa suggests that they execute the smuggler so that they present a sort of honorable gesture towards the Asian authorities. And Pauline's father is not very pleased about the idea, but he says that There is no other way. So Yukimasa, because he comes from a family of samurai, at least as he reveals it, because there are a lot of things we do not know about Yukimasa's past. In both of his incarnations in the house in Fata Morgana, his past is always shrouded in a bit of mystery. In fact, if you were to add a bit more fantasy afterthought to the story, you could say that perhaps there is a sort of curse in Yukimasa's family, because Yukimasa received a katana from his grandfather, if I'm not mistaken, and Yukimasa is quite eager on using this katana. What if it's a sort of cursed blade? You know how there are some occult things related to katana, like for example, if it was forged by Masamune or Muramasa, you'll have this legend of divine or cursed swords. Maybe there is a sort of thing attached to that katana. We will never know, unless they elaborate that in a sort of side story later on. So Yukimasa is quite eager or quite excited about using his katana. So he suggests that the smuggler commit seppuku, or a ritual suicide. And Pauline's father is not very sure about this thing, especially because the sailor is from the west and does not know how to do that ritual. But Yukimasa will say that it says that is not a problem. He can assist with beheading the culprits. So the execution is being carried out, but this suspect of the smuggling is, at the last moment he says that he didn't do it, he's innocent. But before he can present a case, Yukimasa just cuts him down. He kills him before he has a say. He shuts down the arguments that he is going to present. And Yukimasa's Pauline's father, Asama, notices that Yukimasa smiled a little when he cut that man. So he's a bit disturbed, but he thinks that maybe it's just his imagination. And it turns out that, well, here I'm going to make a small pause. Maybe if you have complete confirmation that he was an evildoer, and depending on the crime, maybe the executioner could get some pleasure out of it. But the entire thing is quite shady, so it's quite disturbing that Yukimasa smiled. And here is where you start to see that Yukimasa has a lot of baggage, psychologically speaking. From that moment on, Yukimasa becomes fascinated with killing and spilling blood. He later on finds a silver coin, and he starts to... They do not tell you too much about the investigation, but you get a sense that maybe there is an error. Maybe there was no smuggler. I don't remember the exact lines, but maybe there was no smuggler and it was just some sort of mistake. Yukimasa himself takes this silver coin that he found and he pockets that coin, not because he wants to sell it later on, because he has some evil plans for that coin. And he says, oh, maybe the entire thing was just an accident. But here's where Yukimasa just becomes possessed by this urge, this craving, hunger to kill other people. He actually plants the coin in the luggage of another sailor and accuses that sailor of being the smuggler all along. And he asks Pauline's father for permission to interrogate him. He never tells the exact method that he's going to use. And so he knocks out this sailor and he ties him down and starts to torture him by breaking his fingers and telling that sailor to confess. Inquisition, Catholic Inquisition type of interrogation, because Yukimasa knows that this man didn't do anything. He was not the smuggler. He's just an innocent sailor, at least innocent in that regard. And Yukimasa is just using this excuse to torture him and eventually kill him. So it's quite cruel. The entire thing is very cruel. You can see how Yukimasa is interrogating him, knowing quite well that he will not be able to give up a satisfying answer about this smuggling operation, because he didn't do anything, nothing related to that. And so the man, it's quite a nightmarish scene as Yukimasa starts to break all of the fingers of of that man's hands, and eventually he strangles the guy, and in a quite a sadistic way, he strangles the guy, and then he lets go so that he gets a bit of more air, and he strangles him again, so they can prolong the death of the man. Eventually he kills him and he tosses the body overboard. So Yukimasa continues to indulge these sadistic pleasures. I don't think you ever get the total amount of like the body count of all the people that he killed in that particular period of his incarnation, but eventually he ends up shipwrecked. I don't remember if they tell you exactly how it happens, if it's a storm or something, but he ends up at the shore of yes, on the sand in some unknown land. It seems to be Spain. And my apologies for those that know the story in perfect detail. It's been quite a while since I've played the game. I spent a few months along the year analyzing how I'm going to make this video, and I didn't get too much back into the story, just the main points. If you think that there is some sort of correction that you can do to the story of Yukimasa and Pauline, please write it down in the comments below. So Yukimasa awakens, but it seems that he was quite scarred both emotionally and physically with everything that he's going through, because this is the first time that he has discovered this murderous hunger within him, or sadistic hunger, perhaps you could say. And so he regresses to a sort of state where he does not remember how to speak perhaps Italian or Spanish. I don't remember. Maybe it all happens in Spain. It's quite confusing. But well, he doesn't speak any of the normal languages on the West. He starts speaking Japanese only. He returns to his roots. And so, because he looks quite wounded and with his clothes all torn out, perhaps even he ended up bloody, and he has his obvious Asian features. When people see him, they think he's some sort of monster. They start to call him Bestia. Many of you know that Bestia means beast in Spanish. It's quite similar, in fact, the two words. So Bestia or beast, he is labeled as this sort of monster, and in a sort of panic, he starts to kill people. Apparently he managed to keep his katana with him, and he starts to cut down people. He's pretty much carrying out a one-man massacre. He kills a lot of people and goes into the woods, and eventually reaches the house. Because as you well know, the house of the house in Fata Morgana transcends time and place. Sometimes the house appears in a certain part of Europe. I think that at one time it appears in America. And this time the house ended up in what appears to be Spain. So Yukimasa enters this house. The people identify him as Bestia or Beast, and he meets the maid. I will talk more about the maid if I make a video later on, in a few months perhaps, where I talk about Michelle and Giselle and all of that. But the important thing is that the maid, as many of you know, the maid is like the caretaker of the house in Fata Morgana. She welcomes Yukimasa as the new master of the house. And this is where the game, actually, the visual novel, starts in this section of the story, presenting Yukimasa as this sort of monstrous, shrouded being. You do not know who Yukimasa is. That's part of the plot twist in this section of the story. You see this sort of aberration of smoke, of like a sort of shadow or dark cloud with some terrifying eyes and a grin. And when he speaks, because he's only speaking Japanese, the maid can understand him because she's a supernatural being in a way. But the way that Yukimasa speaks, they have this very disturbing sound effect, a sort of like a giggling or laughter. This is a perfect way to introduce something disturbing in horror stories. If you're using a huge monster, if you give that monster like a almost like an impish sort of sound, it's a bit more disturbing because when you see something huge and monstrous, you usually expect like a booming or very like intimidating voice. But when that huge thing speaks with like an impish or giggly sound, that's quite disturbing. For the same reason that, for example, in some horror stories, you could have like some small thing, perhaps like a possessed doll, speaking with a really monstrous voice. That's also disturbing. So in this case, Yukimasa is presented to the reader of the visual novel as this sort of cloudy monster, because the reader is not doesn't know that this is actually a human, but you are looking at Yukimasa's inner monster, you could say. So Yukimasa starts to accept his place within the house. If I remember correctly, there is a part of dialogue that explains that he even killed the maid or dismembered her, but because she is an immortal being, she kind of like just shrugged it off and kept on doing her thing. So Yukimasa starts to behave as the master of the house. He starts to act a bit more human because of the trauma that he suffered. He's still under the effects of this sort of amnesia. He thinks that he is actually a bestia, a beast, or a monster, and so he thinks that he's actually a monster trying to pretend to be human. So as the maid starts to instruct him in different things, how to follow a certain human protocol, this is very fascinating. I will talk later on in the analysis why this is so fascinating from a psychological point of view. And Yukimasa starts to receive guests in that house, that is travelers that got lost perhaps in the forest, and they were looking for some sort of a refuge or safe haven in the house. He receives them, and he starts to play along as he is like this host, this educated, perhaps even gentle host. But the urge always wins, and he murders each of the people that he receives. They do not come all together, of course. It's usually a lone traveler, and he at first treats them somewhat nice, and then he kills them. And this keeps on happening until this white-haired girl arrives. I will talk more about that girl when I release a video talking about Morgana herself. So the white-haired girl, she is different from all of the other visitors. She is blind, she is quite sickly, and this pulls the rug under Yukimasa's feet, under Vestia's feet. He is not sure if he should kill her. He kind of becomes a bit curious about her condition and her situation, and he even at one point assaults her, but he doesn't kill her. There is something about her purity, of just accepting things in a very zen-like way because of her blindness, that he keeps her as a sort of tether or connection to his human self, what little remains of it. This is key in Yukimasa's story. In a way, Pauline, in a very important way, Pauline was his tether when he met her back then in before the entire journey to the east. Perhaps if he had remained with her, if they had been a bit more honest with each other, perhaps this wouldn't have happened. It's difficult to tell. And I'm not going to talk about the events in other games. I'm sticking to the house in Fata Morgana because there is more information in those games. So Yukimasa starts to live with this white-haired girl, and it seems that there is a sort of prosperous, or perhaps peaceful way of life, you could say, rather peaceful way of life. I said prosperous because the house seems to provide everything for them, and Yukimasa finds a sort of peace with this white-haired girl and the maid serving them. But Pauline, she does not know what happened to Yukimasa and her father, so she decides to travel east. That's quite brave of her. A lone girl trying to find her lover in distant lands. So she kind of like starts to look for him, and arrives at that place that seems to be Spain. It's like the last known location where the ship was spotted. So Pauline arrives, and she starts to make contact with different people. They are into too friendly and too informative about where she could find Yukimasa. She starts to describe the Yukimasa to the other people, but they are not, because they are so shaken up by the events with Bestia. They don't want to know anything about that. And she meets up with this boy named Javi. He's quite jaded, looks a bit to be a bit hostile at first because his parents were killed by Yukimasa. He's not in the best of moods, but little by little he starts to warm up to Pauline, and he decides to lead her to Bestia's mansion in the woods because he didn't want her to go there, but she fears that perhaps Yukimasa went into Bestia's house and something happened to him. But that's the cruel joke. Yukimasa is Bestia. Yukimasa is the beast. So she goes there with Javi. That's his name, short for Javier, and she takes a look into the house through one of the windows, and she sees Yukimasa. So without even thinking, completely infatuated with, in love with Yukimasa, she just goes into the house. And because Yukimasa had this idea that Asian people were monstrous, because he himself having an Asian look to him, he thought, oh well, that makes sense because I am a bestia. He probably thought, but when he looks at Pauline, he looks at someone that has seen his same appearance, that looks quite similar to him. So he starts to run away from her throughout the entire house, and she starts to chase after him despite Javi warning her that she shouldn't do that Yukimasa is Bestia. Here you can see some flaws, some very important flaws in Pauline's character. The young boy is telling her that this man is Bestia, and instead of listening to him, she's just almost mindlessly, completely driven by her emotion, she starts to chase Yukimasa across the house, and eventually she reaches him, and he kills her in cold blood. It's quite a horrible scene. The deaths in the house in Fata Morgana are very realistic because they are not clean. You can see how Yukimasa takes his katana and cuts her down quite horribly, quite messily in fact. You can see that despite Yukimasa being such a talented swordsman, he's not clean. So he's not a professional killer. It seems like more of an instinct type of thing. So Yukimasa kills her, and then it's when Yukimasa awakens. That is, the Bestia personality comes back into contact with his human self, Yukimasa, and he starts to have these revelations, this sort of clearing of his mind. He escapes the amnesia and starts to remember everything that happened on the ship, and his past with Pauline. That was like the breaking point, because he and Pauline had this sort of very strong bond, and for a psychopath, he was actually developing a slightly healthy relationship with Pauline, at least during those days they spent together. And now he realized that he killed his tether, his link to humanity. Now only the white-haired girl remains as his only link to his human self. So Yukimasa tries to keep on with his life, but the white-haired girl, as expected of the curse in the house of Fata Morgana, she becomes really sick, and so he decides to go to the village to gather some food for her so that she feels a bit better. But while he is away, Javi actually informed the other villagers of what happened with Pauline, because Javi has had enough. First he saw his parents getting killed, and now this new woman Pauline that kind of became, if not a friend, at least an acquaintance. He gets a group of people to go into the house, and they find the white-haired girl and thinks that she's in league with the beast, and they kill her. And so Yukimasa arrives when they are doing that, And remember, Yukimasa, he looked like a beast, a bestia at first because he was fresh from the shipwreck. But when he arrived at the village, he dressed up a lot like a nobleman because of the clothes that he found in the mansion. So nobody identified him as a beast, at least then. So when Yukimasa goes back into the mansion, he suffers this great emotional crisis where his humanity is completely shattered. He lost Pauline. He actually killed Pauline himself, and now he sees the haired girl killed as well, and he just starts killing everyone. And that's the end of his story. You never hear more about him, if someone else killed him or if he eventually found death on his own. Because Yukimasa, although he is quite the psychopath and quite a villainous character, although there are some minor redeeming points later on, you can see that he is quite unmatched in combat. Probably the best warrior in the entire visual novel, at least skill wise. So, this is how you are introduced to Yukimasa and Pauline. And later on, in the house in Fata Morgana, you explore the past lives of Yukimasa and Pauline, and this explains a bit more about why things happened the way that they did. Without getting too much into detail concerning the life of Morgana, in the past, which seems to be um, a bit before medieval times, or perhaps early medieval times, you see that there was this part where Morgana was taken as a sort of slave during the attack to the brothel. So Morgana is one of the prisoners, and she's being transported with Yukimasa back then, in that incarnation. In that life, Yukimasa, you also do not know much about his past. It seems that he has some sort of slave or worker related sort of past, and he's somewhat of a physically fit man. So while Yukimasa has some sort of subtle interactions with Morgana, he eventually decides to escape his captors, and he butchers all of the slavers in that slave caravan. Now, this is a key moment. This is sort of like the origin story of Yukimasa, at least presented in the house in Fata Morgana, because Yukimasa already has that murderous urge. He killed those slavers. If he had remained just like that, he had the potential to become a hero. But he also starts to kill the prisoners, the slaves, people that didn't attack him at all. He only spares Morgana because there is a sort of quality to her, a sort of spiritual virtue to her voice, her attitude, that he decides to spare her almost on a whim. And Yukimasa starts to survive in Europe. Mm. Yukimasa eventually meets up with Pauline in that period, in that section of time. And in back then, Pauline was an orphan girl that was living in this sort of orphanage. You can see some shared moments with Maria and other of the characters. You also don't have too many details about this part of Pauline's life. I kind of suspect that maybe there was some sort of abuse in that orphanage, especially because Maria eventually left that orphanage. And I'll talk about Maria in another video, where I also talk about Jacopo. So Pauline becomes a nun, and she's actually quite the kind person. She actually wants to help others, and she meets up with Yukimasa, and Yukimasa, it was then that he developed this sort of bond with Pauline. Yukimasa knows that he has this urge to kill people. He enjoys causing pain, despair, anguish. He likes to cut people down and spill blood everywhere. But with Pauline, he always feels so tranquil, relaxed. He never accepts his feelings as love to Pauline. It's more like it's almost like he has a sort of family relation to her, or he wants to develop that sort of link. But with in Pauline's case, she always wants to treat Yukimasa as a sort of lover, even though there is no physical contact. So Yukimasa wants to see that Pauline, that she has a good time, or rather she's an effective nun, to put it in a way, by helping others, the sick and the needy, and all of that. Mm, so he wants her to be prosperous in that sort of lifestyle. He wants the church that Pauline is working at to be well maintained, that there is never a shortage of food and water and perhaps even coin. So he starts to think of a way to keep that church going so that Pauline keeps helping people. He probably carried out a lot of shady undertakings to keep that church going. Maybe he started. I think that was implied that he started to kill people and take their money. He became sort of bandit. And here is where Jacopo, the current lord of a close by city, sees Yukimasa. He appraises him, and because Jacopo in that part of the story he's quite tainted, you could say, he recognizes that taint in Yukimasa. He knows that Yukimasa is a man that is willing to do anything for whatever is driving him. So Jacopo, because he's a very perceptive man, he appraises and perceives exactly what is Yukimasa's motivation. He knows that Yukimasa is quite fond of this nun, Pauline. So he summons him to the Lord's manor, and he proposes a deal to Yukimasa. There is a witch by the lake. Many, of course, you know that it's Morgana, the witch. And Jacopo does not know the identity of Morgana, of course, but he has heard that this witch has a miraculous blood that heals people. So he tells Yukimasa that the Lord, that Jacopo is going to care for Pauline. He's going to make sure that her church is always thriving and that she can do whatever she likes to do, helping others, and perhaps even he's also going to make it look as if she is the saint that has some sort of healing power, but it's actually going to be Morgana's blood that is going to be used as sort of medicine. So he asks Yukimasa to capture this witch by the lake and to bring her to the Lord, so that they can exploit her, use her blood to heal others, and to say that it's Pauline's holy power that is being employed to cure people. So they actually carry out this plan, but knowing Yukimasa, he has a difficult time restraining his sadistic urges. So first, he tries to get into Morgana's cottage, but he doesn't want to make too much of a ruckus or to make it too obvious, and Morgana is not going to open the door for him because she recognizes the voice of the man that killed all of those slavers and the slaves. So Yukimasa decides to resort to other methods. He finds out about the interactions between Mel and Morgana, and he gets into Mel's house and threatens Mel with killing his sister if he doesn't let him inside Morgana's cottage. That is, he tells Mel to knock on her door and let him in. Now Mel obviously does this to protect his sister, and I think Mel fooled himself into thinking that this was not just that it was just a simple visit. Maybe he thinks, oh, this man probably has some business with Morgana. He's going to go in and he's going to talk about something and he's going to leave. So when Mel goes with Yukimasa to Morgana's cottage and he knocks on Morgana's door, tricking her into thinking that it's just Mel. When she opens the door, Yukimasa forcefully steps in and cuts one of the Morgana's arms. He cuts her arm. He gives the arm to Mel because of the blood. He says, like, here is your source of blood so that you can keep healing your sister with Morgana's blood, which is quite gross. Imagine keeping an arm, a sort of blood supply to heal someone. It was terrifying. Mel actually tosses the arm into the lake later on, if you remember, for those that have played the novel. And Yukimasa captures this almost dying Morgana. I think he applies some sort of tourniquet to the arm and to the stump, and puts her in a sack and takes her to Jacopo. This is one of the most hateful actions done by Yukimasa, in my opinion. So he takes this armed, sorry, this captured Morgana to Jacopo, and I'm going to cover more about that or talk more about that when I talk about Jacopo. But Jacopo enters also enters into this sort of crisis because he had a past with Morgana, and in a sort of desperate move, he locks her in this tower, and Yukimasa, well, he gets his payment of having Pauline as this sort of nun, now treated as a saint that heals people with this miraculous medicine that is actually Morgana's blood. And so that's supposedly how the story went. Things change later on when Michelle interacts with Yukimasa and Jacopo, but it was basically like that. They kept up this facade that Pauline was healing others, and they were actually bleeding Morgana to death. And later on, people started to get sick. The blood, because it was sort of a placebo effect, people thought that they were getting cured, but the blood probably was contaminated in some way because people started to die. And remember that Morgana had this sort of skin condition. It's never exactly, it looks like leprosy or something. Probably something bacterial, who knows. It seems to have a sort of supernatural origin. It's difficult to tell, but a lot of people start to die, and they eventually blame the church, Pauline, and anyone related with the thing. That there is the Lord as well. It was an entire massacre and an uprising of the people. They probably killed Pauline. I don't remember if they did that, but they also killed Yukimasa. Despite being quite skilled with the blade, he couldn't fight all of the enraged people. So here is the like the conclusion or the end. That's the sad story of Yukimasa and Pauline. I know I skipped a lot of specific and particular details to the story, but I just wanted to give this summary before we dive into this analysis of what I think about Pauline and Yukimasa. Let's start with Yukimasa because Pauline, mm, although she has an important role to play, she is quite secondary in my opinion when compared to the insanity that plagues Yukimasa. It's obvious that Yukimasa has some serious problems. We do not have enough information that reveals if there was something related to his childhood that initiated this sort of trauma or this fascination with blood and killing and being a sadist. At least a murderous sadist, to put it more specifically. Mm-hmm. Some people are born like that, but there is always a choice. It's like Dexter. You remember the series, this psychopath that actually recognized his murderous urges, and instead of becoming a villain, he starts to kill other serial killers and other bad people and such. That's one way of channeling your your psychosis. It's very difficult to handle that sort of state, probably. And well, in the case of Dexter, he had this sort of father that guided him. And this father that taught him a way of channeling that his psychosis. Mm, so this reminds us that we are not only shaped by our experiences. There are many people that goes through similar experiences, and they end up being very different. I'm not going to. This is actually. I'm going to keep things ambiguous. I don't think this person is watching the video, but I have a close friend that actually went through a similar upbringing when compared to Dexter. You may remember Dexter from the TV show that he was actually was quite sad that his mother was killed in front of him, and the baby was in a pool of blood. Well, this friend of mine, he went through a similar situation, and he's currently a family guy and living a normal life. He didn't become a psychopath. He's actually one of the best chefs, probably in his state. And no, he's not doing something crazy like he's going to feed parts of people like in those urban legends and stuff. He's actually a really amazing guy. Um, I've never known anything bad about him, and I'm really perceptive at least in my opinion, I'm quite perceptive when it comes to sizing up or judging character, and he's one hell of a guy. He's a really good guy, and he also had that violent upbringing. So I don't think that there is any excuse for Yukimasa to that he became such a bad guy. Although I will talk about some slight positive things later on in this analysis. So Yukimasa, mm, I think he has a lot of importance as a character because he reminds us that we all have a bestia within, a beast. And if you not take control, not learn to take control of beast, that beast is going to control you. Sort of like it's as if you are riding this beast or this monster. If you let the monster just go loose, galloping everywhere, butchering everyone, you're going to be you're a weak person. Control is not about not ever using that uh, violence, but learning how to use it. Because unless you are completely sheltered, there will be several moments in your life where you will have to fight. Maybe not always physically, but you will have to find some way on crushing your enemies, to put it in Conan lingo. And if you do not have control over your beast, that is, you can unleash it when you wanted to. That beast is going to control you and it's going to eventually destroy your life because, as you can see in Yukimasa's both incarnations, and even though this is a fictional story, it can serve as a sort of mirror to real life stories. In both of his incarnations, his life is completely ruined because he did not choose to do the right thing. He just let this beast, this bestia loose and start to do all sorts of bad things. So Yukimasa is a reminder of that we all have that bestia within us. And now I want to talk a bit more about Pauline. Many think that, well, Yukimasa is a psychopath, he's probably the most evil character, but Pauline, she also seems to be quite insane. I also do not know if there is some sort of root to it in her past, but there are many things that point out that something is not right with Yukimasa. For example, when they first are introduced in the visual novel, that is when Pauline's father is a sort of merchant, and Pauline starts to talk to Yukimasa. She should have noticed that he was too empty. He was always just smiling and giving like this empty compliments, and everything was just, it was quite shallow and superficial in my opinion. And it was all on the part of Pauline. She keeps like showering Yukimasa with affection, and she should have noticed that there was something wrong, that it was quite one-sided, and that Yukimasa was not presenting anything about him. It was sort of like a mirror. He had a very empty persona. And this is remember that I told you that there was quite an interesting thing when it comes to the entire thing of Bestia trying to be human and all of that. Psychopaths, at least let's say the ones that thrive in their psychopathy, from a survival perspective, they learn from a very early age that they need to pretend to be sane. That is, because they usually do really sick things, like they start to kill and torture animals. They are always looking for weapons, perhaps, or some sort of object to inflict pain on others. And when someone dies, they express no remorse. They could even perhaps even a family member could die, and they will be like, oh yeah, well, like if nothing had happened. They start to think that they need to be charming and charismatic to trick others, to fool others into thinking that there is nothing wrong with them. So that's the reason what many of you know this, but that's the reason why there are so many charming psychopaths, because they have learned to master the how to act, how to put on a show in front of others, trying not to let their bad side to come out. Although a lot of them fail quite miserably, they end up killing someone, and that's really strange. Actually, a lot of psychopaths, they really like to kill animals, like rodents. Well, in the case there is a plague, sure, you should kill rats and rodents and all of that, but they always have this sadistic need to kill other animals, cats, and many other things. So they like to torture animals and kill them. And of course, a human being is an animal, so they also like to kill humans. So it's obvious that Yukimasa mm, learned to be, at the very least, superficially charming. And Pauline, because she was so infatuated, in a way, she reminds me on how Nelly tricked herself into thinking that Mel is a prince, or had a princely attitude to him. Pauline thinks that Yukimasa is such a cool guy, and he, because he's a successful businessman with her father, he's probably the best candidate for a husband or whatever, and she never tries to look deeper into him. So I think Pauline, although I wouldn't say that she's part of the problem, perhaps she had an opportunity to stop that problem. Perhaps if both of them had been more honest, things could have taken a better turn. Because Yukimasa, here's the thing about Yukimasa. One of his, I wouldn't say a redeeming trait, but one of the more interesting things about him is that despite being such a murderous psychopath, such a sadist, he recognizes that there is something wrong with him, and he's trying to escape that, but he has this compulsion, this need to keep on harming others. He's kind of like, oh, I killed someone else. Oh, now I need to find a way to fix things. Oh, I did it again. I want to become human. So he's completely a prisoner of his beast. You could say that just as his beast is killing others and being acting as a sadist, he's also a victim of his own character flaws. Not to justify him, it actually shows how he's such a weak character at the core. Mm, so I think Pauline could have, perhaps if she perceived this and she started to, after informing others that there's something that is not quite right with Yukimasa, and perhaps had a heartfelt conversation with him that, oh, I know you're pretending to be this or that, or and that, even in a place that is somewhat safe. Perhaps Yukimasa could have opened up to her, because he actually, when Michelle interacts with them in the first lives that they had in the story, they actually reach a sort of understanding, and it was very difficult to get Pauline to accept that, even though there were witnesses, and most importantly, because well, I guess you could say that there weren't witnesses exactly, but people that saw enough in Yukimasa's actions and the entire affair around Morgana's imprisonment, that it was enough material for Pauline to make up her own mind, to think for herself, but she refused to see reality, the reality of Yukimasa, of who he was. She fell into complete denial. She simply wouldn't listen to reason. So I think Pauline is also quite not right in the head. It's important for you to analyze things, to think for yourself, to not create this sort of image just because you had this vision of how things should be from very young. Because you can see that Pauline, when she was a little girl, probably started to think that she was going to meet this sort of Prince Charming. That's what I was saying of her being slightly similar to Nelly in that regard. And she saw Yukimasa, and she immediately placed this tag on him that, oh, you're my Prince Charming, and never saw him for what he actually was. When Michelle interacts with Yukimasa, and I will talk more about Michelle in another video, he actually talks sense into him. Yukimasa, for all of his pragmatic approach when it comes to satiating or satisfying his hunger to kill, it seems that he actually has a very intense or powerful idea on angels and demons. He actually recognizes that he's some sort of demon, or he's being possessed by some sort of demon, and he looks at Michelle as some sort of angel. And so when Michelle interacts with Yukimasa in this that sort of redemption arc, he actually works with Michelle to get Jacopo into a separate place and threaten him with violence if he does not listen to Michelle. So you could say that that is the only moment in the house in Fata Morgana when Yukimasa actually uses his that rage, that chaos, that psychopathic hunger in a positive way. Because he should, in the case of Yukimasa, maybe he could have straightened himself out by identifying that he was not going to change, that he always had this need to kill, and maybe he could have turned into some sort of hero, trying to focus on evil people. Because, like I said, in the case of the slavers, he could have killed the slavers and stopped that and released the people, and he would have been like the hero, the liberator. But he started to kill all the slavers as well, just because he felt this satisfaction on killing others. So I think both Pauline and Yukimasa are not right in the head. They are in their own ways. Each one is completely controlled by a sort of animal nature. In the case of Yukimasa, he has this hunger to kill, to kill, to kill. Maybe at the core of it, he's actually afraid. Maybe he wants to kill others before they kill him, and he has forgotten to identify each case as a separate thing, or at least to group different cases depending on the situation. It's quite complex. And in the case of Pauline, she stopped looking at reality for what it is. That's the difference between the white-haired girl and Pauline. The white-haired girl, like I was saying, even though she was blind, she had this sort of Zen approach to things. She was always on the present, trying to look at the nature of things. And Pauline had this she likes to place tags on the people that she meets. And she saw Yukimasa. Oh, he's a terrific guy. You're tagged with the guy that I want to marry. So that's quite messed up on her part. She's not a murderous psychopath like Yukimasa, but you could say in a way she's an advocate or a protector of murderous psychopaths, because this is quite evident when Michelle tries and the others try to talk sense into Pauline, and she's actually accusing them of being evil. No, you are lying. That also reveals a lot of arrogance on the part of Pauline. I think that's a sort of parallel with many problems in our current days, in our modern life. A lot of people are imprisoned by their own arrogance and stupidity. What I mean by this is that perhaps you are presented with something that is not true, but it's quite comfortable to think that it's actually true. And when someone reveals to you that that is false, actually, that person could become quite defensive because that person could think, oh, well, I'm never wrong, so this person is lying, or this person is a fool. And that person could also be quite afraid of having been tricked or deceived. So instead of thinking that she or he were deceived by someone or something, they start to think that the person that is revealing this truth is actually trying to deceive them instead. So there is a lot of arrogance. I think the arrogance is like the core of being stupid. It's the root of you acting foolishly. So I see a lot of arrogance in Pauline. You can see in Yukimasa's fake smile, in all of the deaths that happen around him, in all of his shady undertakings. You know very little about him, that there is something wrong with him. And Pauline is too arrogant to admit that she has been deceiving herself. Or that Yukimasa has been deceiving her, because he has been deceiving her by presenting those fake words and that fake smile. So they are really, really flawed characters, and I think of probably my least favorite characters of the entire visual novel. Probably. And but I think that a lot of people just focus on Yukimasa because he's such an an obvious uh, bad guy. But Pauline is also quite the case herself. There is something quite wrong with her. So if there is something that we should take from this story of Yukimasa and Pauline, is that you shouldn't deceive yourself, but in contrast with the story of Mel and Nelly, you could also find a way to transform or transmute those flaws. Because, for example, Yukimasa, like I said, has that murderous rage. I think there is great power in that violence, and he should have he should have used that violence in a more constructive way, perhaps by becoming some sort of warrior. There are many ways in which you can employ that urge. There are people that deserve to be the targets of such a rage, and Yukimasa just started to use it with anyone who passed him by. And in the case of Pauline, despite her tricking herself, I think there is a lot of love and passion within her. So maybe she should have either channeled her love and passion into getting Yukimasa out of his shell, out of that facade, to get him to open up to her that he has actually has these urges, this hunger to kill others and try to work things out. Or maybe, or even though that's quite the dangerous thing, if you confront someone that is actually like that, there is a chance that you can actually become the target, because maybe no one else knows and he looks at you as a potential threat. He may actually try to kill you. So that's contains a lot more particulars or details concerning strategic and tactical thinking. And well, because Pauline is not exactly a fighter, I wouldn't recommend that she actually confronted Yukimasa, at least in that setting. Mm, so it would have been better if she used her affections with for a more deserving man, or like I said, if she's actually completely infatuated, completely she thinks that Yukimasa is like her destined person. The best way would have been to have used her for her to use her passion, her love, to get him to open up. Although there would be the risk of her getting killed, because Yukimasa, he was quite unpredictable. Just by the way he cut Morgana's arm, just like that, in that part of the story, who is to say that he wouldn't try to kill Pauline if that actually happened? So they are quite tragic characters. Mm, at least when it concerns the House in Fata Morgana visual novel, their story ends there. But we can take so much from those characters, and like I said, if you play tabletop role-playing games, I think these two characters serve quite well to present some non-player characters, some villainous non-player characters. Perhaps if you want to handle a sort of murder mystery, you could present Yukimasa as some sort of guy that seems to be quite nice and gentle, and he's actually the killer or the murderer, and you have Pauline, or a sort of character like Pauline, that is actually constantly protecting him and shower him with love, and looking down and pointing down everyone who thinks that he's actually a murderer, which he is. And so that's a way to introduce some villainous drama. But if you want to use them as perhaps anti-heroes, you could have them as a sort of redemption presence in your games. Let's say you are a player and you want to play a character that is kind of like Yukimasa but as an anti-hero. Maybe your character is sort of like a psychopath, but he only kills villains and he's constantly looking for villains to kill. And in the case of Pauline, you could use that passion to try and protect those that or yes, protect or make those that actually need that love to feel comfortable and loved by someone. So yes, there were so many things that could have been done to prevent that tragedy from happening. With Yukimasa learning to ride that beast instead of becoming the beast's lackey, his own inner beast. and Pauline to actually channel that passion in a positive way and not placing tags on people. Oh, Yukimasa looks like a gentleman. He is tagged like the nice guy that he is. Mm. So yeah, that's. I think that's pretty much what I can say about them. Maybe I will explore more about them if I actually make a video in covering the reincarnation game. But it's still that video will probably take a lot of months later on to create because I'm still thinking of the things that I could talk about in the House of Fata Morgana visual novel. Well, thank you so much for watching this video. Truly a couple of very complex characters, Yukimasa and Pauline. I'm sure a lot of you can offer more insight about them, more insights. If you have any comments or questions, um, please let me know in the comment section or as a video response or whatever. I would love to hear about your opinion, even if you haven't played the House in Fata Morgana. Now you know the story about Yukimasa and Pauline. Maybe you know about some other fictional cases or maybe real cases like that. Mm, because throughout life you meet all sorts of people. Some people that are actually worse than Yukimasa. So maybe there's something interesting that you want to share. And thank you so much for those that have been supporting this channel, sending Drive Through RPG gift certificates. For those of you that want to further support the channel, all the information how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you for watching this video. I look forward to your comments and see you later.